In today's video, I want to help you improve your photography of your animals. But what do I need to get started? The gear used in this video is the Sony ZV-E10 with a 18-50 Sigma macro lens. You're also going to be needing and using a speed light, the ambient light in your room, window light. Now this one is a little bit more of an expensive model, but on one side you have the grays, and then on the other side you have basically the color, and this will help you get an accurate representation of the color of your animal. They also have these little cheap ones, which you can also use to set exposure, white balance, and then you can make sure that you're basically not going to be blowing out any of your highlights or shadows. Why the ZV-E10? So the ZV-E10 is a great camera. I really like it both for photo and for video. I was using this camera previously for video, and the one thing I did really like about it is you have a flip out screen. That way you can film both horizontal and vertical videos, so it's great for stuff like YouTube as well as for Instagram. There are a couple of things that I do not like about it. One of those being, if you have bigger hands, your pinky and maybe even ring finger are basically going to hang off the edge of it, but they do make cages which can extend the grip. Another thing that I am not a big fan of is some things in the menu system. The camera I'm currently recording on is the Sony FX30. It does not have a front aperture wheel like the FX30 does. You actually use basically just these two back wheels, one for aperture, one for shutter speed, then you have to push a button in for the ISO. So it's a minor inconvenience, but a great starter camera. And with it coming in under, I think it's like 700 something bucks, so it's like under 800 bucks for the camera. Pretty solid. What about the lens? Now you may be saying to yourself that you bought the camera, or you already have a camera and you already have a lens. Sometimes those lenses are not made for macro photography, getting close-up detailed shots of these animals. So for me, I really like having a macro lens. There are 90mm macros, 105mm macros. There's a wide variety of macro type lenses. This one here is 18-50, which is actually really nice because it allows you to get a good wide shot as well as a nice detailed shot. The lens I'm currently using is an 18mm lens. As you can see, it's got me, it's got some scene, some environment. So the same thing can be said about this. It's honestly a great all-around lens. At the longest point is where you would want to actually use this for photographing your reptiles. It's going to create a little bit of compression, but it's also going to get you in there without having it super wide, especially when you're really up close on the animals. Not to mention, this lens can be found for, I want to say it was like 400 bucks or so. So with everything that you need to basically get quality photo and videos of your animals, you'd be looking at putting in about 1,500 bucks or less, which overall is a pretty good deal considering you're using that to market both your animals and your business. What about lighting? Well, lighting is one of the most important things. So as you can see, I have these lights here up above me, and those are daylight calibrated lights. I want to say the guy we had that put the lights in here got them from Home Depot or something. You can find them pretty easily, really. They're LED daylight temperature lights. You can actually change the color temperature on them depending on what you want. Personally, I like the daylight temperature just because I already know that that's about 5,500 Kelvin, which makes it really easy to set my camera settings. Next up, we're going to talk about the speed light. This guy here is a newer 570, also pretty cheap. I want to say maybe 25 to 50 bucks, something like that. Most of the time, I actually use this at, let's see, it's at 1/8 power, so you're really not using a lot of power on these. They take, AA batteries. Super easy, super cheap, and you're not going to want to point this directly at the animal. I actually point this directly up at the ceiling, because what happens is when you take that photo, that light is bouncing off of the ceiling and then creating a very large soft light source to cover your animal. So aside from the flash, you can use additional continuous lights, like the one I have right up here that's just bringing a little bit of fill light into my face, is a 60-watt Zhiyun light. They also are fairly inexpensive at about 250 bucks, 300 bucks, I think. For what we're doing as far as within the animals or even YouTube videos, you shouldn't really need some crazy powerful light source, because all you're really trying to do is fill in the shadows, create a little bit of separation, and overall, something I'm growing into is basically not trying to have a light that is so overpowering and so sourcey, as weird of a word as that is. I'm just wanting to fill it in, make it look a little bit natural, and overall just give the impression that this is what, this room looks like without having the additional light. And you want your snake photos to basically be the same way. You want to get those as close to natural as possible, and sometimes you can experiment and things go awry. I was trying hard light for a while, and the results weren't what I expected, or wanted for that matter. Now, when you are using an additional light source, like that light source right up here, you are going to want to use either a softbox modifier or something like an umbrella, because that will further allow the light to spread evenly and softly over your subject. What about getting the colors right? Well, that is the importance of using a gray card. White balance is extremely important. If you're using your phone or using your camera in automatic settings, your camera is going to make the decision for you what the scene should look like, what the color balance should be, and everything else. Shooting in manual controls allows you to have control over that situation, and one of the most important things, I think, is white balance. Like I mentioned before, whenever you're using white balance, you are telling the camera that this is the gray that it should be referencing to basically make this the shade that it needs to be. Likewise, if you're doing video, you can use this side, and basically you're going to be matching this up, and then you put that into your editing software, and then it basically takes that information in and says, okay, well, this should be this color, this should be this color, and it makes everything true to life. What about camera settings? All right, I get it. Shooting in manual is a little bit of a, challenging task. It's very overwhelming. And overall, it's not as bad as it sounds. You have a couple of things that control your camera settings. You have shutter speed, which is the length of time you're allowing light into the sensor. This can be used to either cause motion blur or to freeze motion. So for these animals, you're typically going to want to have a shutter speed of around 1/200th of a second, and oftentimes that will fall within the flash sync speed of your camera, which basically means you won't get any black bars. If you set your shutter speed too high, you are going to get black bars because you are catching the shutter as the flash hits the sensor when you're taking your photo. Aperture is another camera setting that is going to affect your images. So think of your aperture kind of like your pupil. If the light is shining really bright into it, your pupil is going to contract. If you're in a dark room, your pupil is going to expand, allowing more light in. The only difference here is however big your aperture is, which ironically enough is a smaller number, the shallower depth of field you are going to get. And with this Sigma lens that I mentioned before, you have a maximum aperture of 2.8. So that basically just means the sensitivity to light that this camera is, and also how shallow of a depth of field that you can get. For instance, if you had an f/22 lens, you would basically be getting everything in focus. The plane of focus is going to be very large. With a 2.8 lens, your plane of focus is very small. For most of the reptile photos, I do recommend shooting in between, somewhere between 4 and like 5.6, because at that point you're going to have a little bit of front to back focus on whatever you're shooting, and if the animal moves, you're potentially not going to miss focus completely. Now, the setting that you're going to be adjusting the most is most likely going to be your ISO. A lot of people will talk about ISO and adding graininess and different things like that to the photo or noise. Quite frankly, I don't think you're going to have to crank it that high for it to be that crazy, but nonetheless, ISO is your camera's sensitivity to light. So now that you hopefully understand some of the basics of your camera settings, let's talk about one important factor, and that's your composition. Whenever you're posting these animals onto social media or onto Morph Market, which is the primary purpose of this video, you need to take into consideration how those images are going to be displayed. On Morph Market, whenever you go onto that site, the majority of the images are in a square format. So if you're shooting a bunch of vertical images, you're going to potentially have a bunch of stuff cut off. Now, whenever you're taking photos of your animal, I like to basically consider the frame, and then I like to put them right in the middle of that, And then I like to have room top to bottom, left to right. That way, there's plenty of room if on that main image that whenever it crops in, it's not going to be cutting off any portions of the animal. So whenever I'm taking my images, I like to typically get at least 3 or 4 shots, and those include overall a full body shot, a close-up head shot, a shot of the pattern, and then I also like to get just a shot that, I don't know, I guess just looks nice, where, you know, maybe like the body's in focus and then the head's out of focus behind it, or vice versa, where you have like the head really nicely in focus and then the rest of the body's kind of behind it out of focus. It creates a really nice look. I also feel it is important to get all those variety of shots, because then you're going to have a lot less questions. Improving your photography would also typically lead, in my opinion, to less people asking you for additional pictures of the snake, because what else do they want to see? You already have a full body shot showing the complete pattern, and typically that's done from, I don't know, whatever angle this is, 45-degree angle, something like that, so that way you have a full kind of overview of the animal. You also have close-up detail shots of interesting parts in the pattern to prove whether this mutation is in this animal or not. A close-up shot of the head that just overall just looks nice. I mean, overall, having decent images will reduce the amount of people that are asking questions about seeing more pictures. You could also take a video. Morph Market allows that too. Now let's get started on the flash portion of this video. So we're going to begin by making sure that our background is basically black. So as I mentioned before, what we're going to want to do is get our shutter speed to about 1/200th of a second, an aperture of 5.6, and then we're going to adjust the ISO down to, I don't know, let's say 200 or so. And as you can see, a black image. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to add our flash. And I currently have this at 1/16th. And before I pull out any snakes, I do like to use my little buddy here. I use him as a means of basically ensuring that my exposure is correct. And it's looking a little bit dark, so for that, I'm going to bring my power up. Still a little bit darker than I would like. So I've already brought my power up. I'm at 1/4 power. I'm going to bring my ISO up to about 400. A little too high. Bring my ISO down a little bit, and I'm also going to position him right here, really zoom in. That way I can basically compress the background. And overall we ended up with a pretty even image of our buddy Steve. Now the image is a little bit blue, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the white balance cards. I'm going to take a picture with our buddy Steve right next to those. And now that I have that image, what I can basically do is go into Lightroom, select that white card, and then that is basically going to change our white balance to be accurate. It would be great to get it done perfectly well in camera, but sometimes the display just isn't going to match what it should. So in those instances, basically taking the picture with that gray card and then using that for later is going to be your best bet. Now that our boy Steve has put in his work, I'm going to grab an animal. We're going to get a couple of shots of it, and then we're going to move on to the natural light portion. So this beauty here is a confusion yellow belly hypo female. I already have a confusion hypo female, so I think I am going to be letting this girl go, and I need to get some photos of her. So I have already recorded this a few times, and she's not very cooperative. Spoiler alert. But we're going to try our best. So I like to wrangle them up, keep them kind of curled a little bit there. Chill out, chill out, chill out. Just need 2 seconds of your time. And she is making the great escape. Ball pythons are usually pretty nice to work with, but man, she has given me a run for my money today. So we got a full body shot, we got a close-up shot. What I'd like now is a shot of her head, just because I like how dark and rich the pattern and color is on these confusions, if she would stop moving. Nope, 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 nope. As I mentioned, she's not super cooperative. But nonetheless, this does need to get done. And I'd want to actually do photos of animals that I would actually use for stuff. So here we are. You're experiencing the pain real time with me. No, just stay right there. Just 2 seconds. That's all I ask of you. There we go. Perfect, perfect. Awesome. And that shot should be really nice. Alright, so overall, the images we got turned out pretty decent. Headshot. Orange was trying to get away a little bit, but it looks like we have a nice little tongue action in that one, so that's kind of cool. The kind of cool shot with the front half of her in focus, the back half out of focus, and then we have a full body shot just overall showing her pattern. Now, because she was moving around more than I liked, I didn't get as much space around her as I would have liked, but sometimes you just got to take what you can get. The next segment is going to be on the ambient light within your snake room. Again, for me, like I said, it was these LED lights, and this is basically the same as using window light. So I'm not going to go through and show that because basically it's repetitive, and overall it's not necessarily that complicated. I think once you understand the basics of understanding how your camera works and how to use the settings, it increases your skill level, and then practice makes perfect, which is also why I recommend using something else to practice all of these things on, so you're not being worn out by snakes that are basically not cooperative. So again, to get our proper exposure, we are going to use our buddy Steve here. We're going to use our white balance cards here. That way we can get everything right over into Lightroom afterwards and ensure that we have a properly colored photo. So again, settings wise here, the only thing you should really be messing with is probably your ISO, because your shutter speed, you want to be able to freeze motion if the snakes start moving on you. You also want to have a good front to back focus. And then the ISO, as mentioned before, is your camera's sensitivity to light. So if your image is coming out a little bit dark, you can raise your ISO up. That'll overall brighten your image. So we're just going to put our guy in the scene, get the cards right next to him, and then we're going to just get our shot. And overall, pretty perfect. We do have some extra shadows there just from the shipping box foam that my camera is currently mounted up on, but overall it looks pretty good. We are also getting a little bit of shadow off to this side, but that is because I do have a light that's on my face. So if I turn that away, and then now I get a shot of him. Let's see. Overall, and I got to be a little closer than that. Overall, pretty good shot. Alright, so for this one I do want to switch it up, and I'm going to be grabbing a blood python for this one, as she has shed recently and I'd like to get some decent images of her, so that way I can post her up. Here she is. She is a T-positive stripe cherry bomb lineage blood python. Oh, don't get crazy. I see your eyeballs. She's like posing perfectly for all this. Try and get it a little bit wider, how I have a little bit more room to work with. Get a close-up shot of that color on her side. I'm going to try and move her around a little bit here. Get some cool shots of her head. That's going to be a cool one. I'm going to have a little bit of separation between the front and the back of her body. Let me know in the comments down below if you found this video helpful. It's one that I've been putting off making for quite a while because it honestly takes a lot of work to throw some of this stuff together. And what might seem super easy for me might not be super easy for somebody else. So I wanted to try and break it down as best possible to ensure basically the success of the people that watch this video. As always, check us out on Instagram at Nixon Reptiles and check out our Morph Market to find an animal for a new or existing project. Thanks for taking your time to watch this video. We'll see you in the next one.